So in this video, we're going to talk about Joel Schumacher's film, Batman and Robin. Now, this is generally regarded as the worst of the Batman franchise. It's regarded as the film that sort of killed the franchise as it was constructed by Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher through Batman, Batman Returns, and Batman Forever. I actually think this is a better film than Batman Forever. That's a controversial opinion. And like, this is a film that is bad to the point where many of the people involved in it have actually apologized for being involved. George Clooney, who played Batman in the film, has repeatedly apologized for having been involved in this film. That gives you a sense of where this film stands in terms of its quality. This was also a film that followed up on the controversy of nipples on the Batsuit, which was a controversy surrounding Batman Forever, the first Joel Schumacher directed film. And it followed up with more distinctive nipples on the Batsuit. I don't really give a shit about that. I don't think it's an important controversy. But it was a controversy nonetheless. Now, why do I think this is a better movie? It's not a good movie. That's the thing. I'm not saying that. I don't think that this is a cinematic masterpiece that really anybody involved with should be proud of. Uma Thurman's performance is good. She's a good performer across the board. She's good in this movie. But that's about it in terms of quality of the movie itself. The storyline is largely nonsensical. The characterization of the characters, the building of the characters is not that great. What is great about the film is that they joyously and insanely commit to puns and wordplay. Like, I used to say that about 90% of the dialogue was puns or wordplay. Rewatching it, I've revised that down to closer to about 80%. But so much of this film is just bad dialogue. Gloriously bad dialogue. So many puns or plays on words about plants, about freezing or ice or snow or the cold, about bats, about birds. So much of this film, they just committed to it and went 100%. And there's something I find incredibly admirable in this maniac commitment to bad writing. It's cheap jokes, it's dumb jokes, it's bad puns, and it's glorious in its committed terribleness. And that's the thing that you don't have with Batman Forever. It has at least as bad and nonsensical a storyline. Its characters are at least as cartoonish and over the top. Its motivations are at least as pointless and arbitrary. And its cinematography, its visual economy is at least as sort of excessively fantastical. Because that's the other thing about the Joel Schumacher productions. They have, to a certain extent, that kind of hinge of Tim Burton's German expressionist type gothic aesthetic, but it's sort of filtered through this grandiose Art Deco style. The buildings are really Art Deco type buildings. they're much more sort of mid-century skyscraper type buildings. But then in Batman Forever, that's more the case. In Batman and Robin, this is just an insane city that would never be built because it doesn't make any sense. Like, there are these giant statues of just random muscular dudes or whatever it is. And when I say giant, I mean like Mr. Freeze drives his van down the arm and jumps off a finger. These are like massive, massive constructions that serve apparently no real purpose, and they're just there to be decorative in the city. Like, it's an insane thing. But it's so, again, the film is so gloriously committed to this insanity, this bad writing, this insane cinematography, that it redeems itself, I think. It is very much one of those films that is so bad that it is good. And it feels like the kind of film that didn't really attempt to be serious, that just sort of said, we're going to go balls to the wall as much as we possibly can, and that's going to be our legacy. So, the actual storyline itself, you have, as with Batman and Robin, as with Batman Forever, but also as with Batman Returns, you have two villains who decide to work together. You have Mr. Freeze, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's as fine as Arnold Schwarzenegger ever is in a role. He wants to freeze Gotham and hold it for ransom in order to get billions of dollars in research funding. As a contemporary academic, I don't necessarily think that's the worst plan to get research funding I've ever heard, but his wife contracted McGregor's syndrome. He was attempting to cure her. He falls backwards into a vat of some kind of liquid that spontaneously mutated him into Mr. Freeze. He now needs extreme cold temperatures to survive, and he needs diamonds to create his freezing ray. So again, we get origins. I've talked about this with Batman, Batman Returns, and Batman Forever. All origin stories. It's a franchise obsessed with origins. How people come to become villains, how people come to become heroes. That is the overriding, excessive obsession of this entire series. So we get that origin, Mr. Freeze's origin, which looks very, very similar to the Joker's origin in the Tim Burton Batman. Joker falls into some liquid which mutates him into the villain. Then we have the origin story of Poison Ivy, who was a botanical researcher in South America, working for U.S. companies, but in a lab in South America, attempting to crossbreed venomous snakes and plants, which I'm not a scientist. I've said this before on the channel. I don't know from science, but I'm reasonably certain you can't do that. I'm reasonably certain it just conceptually, based on the rules of biology that we have, does not work. Anyway, that's her plan. Her boss is taking her research and trying to create a chemically fueled super soldier. He does this with a dude, Antonio somebody, I think. That's the only time we get his real name. And he just sort of like, once this venom is pumped into him, he just sort of balloons up, kind of like the Hulk. Also, I think in a way that the human body actually does not. It doesn't work that way. You can't have that. And then at the end, when eventually Bane's tube gets pulled out of his head thing, the tube's drilled into his brain, he shrivels back to normal sized dude, which again is not how the human body works, but it is what it is. So when Dr. Isley, Poison Ivy's real name, finds out about this super soldier project, she's like, I'm gonna report you, and her boss is like, well, then I'm going to kill you. So he shoves her through some chemicals. She gets more chemicals dumped on her. And then she comes back as Poison Ivy, prepared to defend the Earth, sort of. So there's a number of interesting things here. I actually find Poison Ivy kind of a fascinating character in this movie. One, because what happens to her is almost a direct ripoff of the creation of Catwoman in Batman Returns, Tim Burton's Batman Returns, in which what's her name? I can't remember Catwoman's real name. She gets pushed out the window by Max Schreck. Instead of properly dying, she comes back. She is revived and comes back as Catwoman. Here we have a woman pushed by her boss to her death, from which she then arises as a villain. Poison Ivy is clearly rooted in anxieties about eco-terrorism in the 1990s. In the 90s, people were very concerned about this. They thought that a lot of people thought that eco-terrorism was going to become a really big deal, which in fact it never actually did. But there was a lot of public discourse around this. And so Poison Ivy is clearly feeding into those anxieties and contributing to sort of the demonization of environmentalists in this period. But Poison Ivy comes to Gotham City to sort of attack Wayne Enterprises, which had funded her research, and cut her funding because her boss was doing his super soldier shtick. Poison Ivy comes with the express purpose of defending the planet. And yet, and particularly defending flora, plants. And yet, she gets right on board with Mr. Freeze's plan to freeze Gotham, and then eventually the world. That's not real good for most plants. It's a bad situation if you're a plant. Typically, most plants don't survive well being covered in ice for extended periods of time. So, the idea that, she is somehow this eco-warrior who is actually striking a blow for the planet is kind of undermined by her actual activities. And again, I think that's probably part of the critique of eco-terrorism that was so current in the 90s. But it's also an interesting undercutting of the character herself. Yeah. So I don't really know what to make of that, how sort of conscious that contradiction is. But the sort of upshot of Freeze's plan ultimately is he sort of takes over this satellite system that can be used to apparently either look at the night sky over any portion of the planet or look back at the planet itself that Wayne Enterprises has built. And he attempts to use it to freeze Gotham. He's mostly successful, but then Batman, Robin, and Batgirl, who I'll talk about in just a second, very briefly, they're like, well, we can reverse this, and we'll use the power of the sun filtered through this giant, basically satellite-powered diamond laser telescope, and we'll thaw Gotham. It'll be fine. So they, fucking blast Gotham with concentrated sunlight. And that's how they thought. Like, the idea that you could do that, and that would be fine, that, like, you could thaw Gotham without that kind of concentrated sunlight just absolutely roasting the entire city, is another bit of this film's just nonsensical insanity. But the other person whose origin story we get in this film is Batgirl, who never shows up again in the franchise, as far as I can tell. The film franchise, at least. I haven't seen some of the more recent Batman movies, so she may make another appearance. But she is Alfred's American niece. I think I want to say it's Alicia Stone who plays her, but I may be wrong about that. She leaves her studies at Oxbridge to come and look after Alfred, who is sick with McGregor's syndrome, conveniently enough. I say conveniently because Victor Fries has figured out how to cure it in the early stages. And we learn that she's like this, I'ma steal a motorcycle and race through the city of Gotham's weird underground where people are like going out in full body paint, and that's their like gang colors and whatnot. And yeah, so she's doing all this like high speed, dangerous motorcycle racing, and then eventually Alfred is trying to get word to his brother that the brother Wilfred needs to come and basically be the new Alfred for Batman and Robin. And Alicia Stone, I can't remember her character's name off the top of my head either. She opens the disc that she wasn't supposed to watch, finds out about the whole Batman, Batcave, Bat everything shtick, and decides that she's going to break into the Batcave. At which point, apparently, even though it's the 90s and Alfred's working with 1990s technology, he somehow programmed his brainwaves into the computer to interact with her, and he's built her a Batgirl suit and stuff to go out and help Batman and Robin. So it's kind of the most pointless, banal origin story for any of the heroes or villains that we've got in any of the movies so far. And yet, again, we have this just obsession with origin stories in the whole franchise.